So all of the topics that we've been covering so far are included here and or in the project manager training guide, which is listed under this same heading here under the category here, project manager training guide. And this also covers some of the topics we've been talking about from phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, all right here. Again, there's 2 documents here. One's a PDF, one is an editable Word document that you could slap your logo on and hand out. And then third, there's another one. So as we start looking towards end user training, project managers, project team members, there is a team member training guide that goes over, this is usually the leave behind for team members after they go through training. After we sit down with them and go through like a 2-hour team member training, then you usually leave them with this handbook afterwards to go over, to have as a leave behind to cover. So all of the topics that we touch on are covered in those KB articles that I send along, but then also within all of these handbooks as well. So just an FYI, sometimes it's a nice little safety net to have to know where those are. So today we're going to continue where we left off yesterday, which was building out your standard project request workflow. And I didn't send my notes over yesterday because it's just a continuation with this morning's call, so I'll send everything over after today's call. But just as a review, we templatize or built steps. We started with these 6, right? And depending on how many workflows you need, typically an organization starting out just uses one workflow. And you can make this as simple or as complex as you need, right? So in some organizations, I've seen 8 to 10 steps in here that they have a mature process. They're a large organization. They have a lot of hoops to jump through, and they might have 8 or 10 workflow steps. I've seen it as minimal or as simplistic as having 1 or 2 steps, just an initial review, and then that they review everything in that one, and then they have an approval, and they have a 2-step workflow. And then I've seen it, everything in between. This 5-6 step workflow is pretty standard, kind of middle of the road, kind of walks you through, like we talked about, initial review, requirements gathering. And again, these 2 could be combined into one to have maybe 5 steps, but 5 or 6 steps is pretty standard. I'd say probably, 80% out of the gate, start with one workflow and have 5 or 6 steps. So this is relatively standard. Once you define your steps, which again is more of a conceptual high-level process, then you need to decide who's doing what on those steps. So we name this our standard project request workflow. We have our 6 steps in here, and we started to define who's doing what on which step. And so we have come over here and we'll edit this. So we didn't get a chance to go through this in detail, so I will now. So the assignments on a step is the persons, or group that is going to review this step, do the actions that you need to have done in this initial review, whatever you call it, and then ultimately select one of the options here, either approve the step, maybe return it to the requester. To note, this person that does this, or the people or the group, they all need to have an enterprise license, because you are doing this activity in the portfolio planning application inside TD Next, and that application does require an enterprise license. So typically these are people that are in the tool on a regular basis, typically part of the PMO, and they all need an enterprise license, as do anybody down here in this assignment options. The assignment options here is just saying should Jonathan want to hand over step approval to somebody, then you need to build that person in here. So let's just say that we do this. What this means is the first step that comes in, Jonathan is going to get an email that he has a workflow step to approve. He is going to then most likely look at the data on the request that's been captured in the request form, and he is going to do one of the actions on it. However, if he wanted to, he could hand it off to James, forward it, give it over to James, and James would be the owner of this step, and James would decide to approve it. Now, why would that happen? It depends on the type of project that's coming in. If maybe Jonathan is super busy and wants to hand it off to James, or if there's a technical reason for this particular step. Sometimes one of these steps over here is a technical review, right? And maybe the technical resource over is put in this assignment options. And then Jonathan, if he knows the technical part of it, he could handle it. If it's needs more technical expertise, then they put a technical resource in here and he can hand it off to that person. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah.
Okay. On this first step, these are the standard check boxes here. It's an active step. You're typically not going to approve or reject the request, although you could. Every once in a while, people turn the reject request on because initially maybe Jonathan is like, hey, sorry, I already know we have a system that does this, and we can reject this thing altogether. Probably not going to approve it, and you're not going to reject the step because what that does is it moves this back to the previous step, and because this is the first step, it's not doing anything. But you could return it to the requester. You could forward it essentially to James or another person with an enterprise license to review this step, or you can edit it all together. So these are the pretty standard check boxes on here. And we go ahead and save that, and it just updates them. We see what are the things that are capable on this very first step. So with all of that being said, if there was a workflow step that you guys leverage called initial review, who would be in these two columns? And again, you don't have to have anybody in the options over here. You do need somebody in the assignments.
So is the assignment person, is that the project leader kind of thing, or is that the manager kind of thing?
This is usually, if you have an established PMO, this is usually somebody that's part of that PMO. Yep. If you don't have an established PMO, and we certainly don't have a lot of, we certainly have customers that don't have an established PMO. It is whoever is the designated person or persons, again, this could be more than one person, who knows what your process is here and knows what to do here. So again, it might be Jonathan, somebody on this call, somebody that we need to train. But whatever activities are part of this step here that you define is what this person or persons would be doing, reviewing it and then most likely approving it and then pushing it through each of these steps until ultimately it gets approval. So if early on you guys are like, this sounds good in theory, but we're not there yet, maybe you want a 1 or 2 step, small, quick project request workflow, right?
Yep.
And I can actually do that even with this. So let's just say that I don't want to leverage step 2, 3, 4, and 5 because it's just overkill for now. But I want to have this final approval step down here called whatever you want to call it. But so then I would just turn on 2 of these 6 steps. And again, I'll just throw Jonathan on here. And I'll throw James on here again. And I'll default it here, and then I'll just flip everything on. So now I have a two-step workflow, essentially. I'm just not turning on the other steps because, and you can leave this here as an example, but this would be just a two-step workflow. And then here's the tricky part to activate a workflow, right? Because up in the right corner it says it's inactive. And then we see, oh, just hit this green button to activate it. Not quite. So I'll walk through these steps with you because it was one of those things that always got me frustrated. Because I'm like, why can't I just press that and activate it? And there's a reason why. And I will send you the knowledge base article on this, but I'll show it to you here. So you do need to, once you configure your steps and turn things on and you have it ready to be activated, you do need to come back to the General tab and you do need to select the Edit button. What that is doing is, here is the actual real active button, not this one. So number one, you need to do that. Number two, you need to make one of these steps a ready for reporting. What does that do? In order for a workflow to be active, a ready for reporting step must be specified. Upon the completion of the ready for reporting step, a project request will appear in portfolio planning reports. So what it's saying is, upon this first step, now the request is a reportable item that can be looked at in reports and on dashboards. It's making that request searchable and reportable and part of your top scored request and your request matrix. So I'm going to save that, and now we'll see that it indeed changed this to active. So what does activate mean, or active? It means that this standard project request workflow is available to be selected on a request. All requests must go through a workflow. So right now, workflows can be applied two ways. Manually, so right on the request, when you look it up, you can go to an actions button. Let me show you in my sandbox real quick. So when a project request has been submitted by the requester through the client portal, right, that request leaves the client portal. It stays there for the requester in their client portal, but it leaves the tool and it comes into portfolio planning inside TD Next, and all project requests are here. So I just have a bunch of test project requests in here. And this one, I'm just going to pick up and look at. And on this request, under the actions, it says assign to workflow. So what that means is all active workflows would be available to be selected in this dropdown. And I have two here. So I can manually assign a workflow, but better yet, I can set this up so it automatically enters into the first step of the workflow upon creation of that project request service. And that's done right here with automation rules. So I'm back in your environment. I'm no longer in my sandbox. I'm going to create a new automation rule. And I'm going to call this one, I'm just going to continue to use that word standard. Project request workflow. So I've created it, and then I do need to edit. And by editing, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie, typically, I'm going to want to make it active again, so that looks familiar to what we just did. But I want to leverage conditions down here, and I typically want to tie the project type to my workflow. So typically the general project type is what I want to use. So now the tool is going to look for the type on that request. And once it finds it, it's going to assign it to the standard project request workflow that we just built. And then if I want to do any additional auto notifications, I could notify other people. And this is typically maybe the PMO director or anybody else who wants to get notified upon project request creation. So this one is currently set up, right, to fire off based on type. And usually this is kind of a set it and forget it. Once you set this up, once you set this one automation rule up, and if you only have the one project request service, which most organizations starting out do, then all of your this workflow is going to be leveraged every time a project request is submitted, and you may not have to do it again until maybe down the road you decide you need other project request services. But I would say 80 to 90% of my customers starting out have one project request service, one project request form, and one project request workflow. So once they set this up, you're good to go until potentially down the road if you need a separate project request service. So what that has essentially done is it has automatically put your project request in the first step of the workflow, much like, okay, I'm back in my sandbox here, and this Badger project request has come in, and I can see that it's in a workflow because it leveraged that automation rule, and I can see down here that it's in the first step of a workflow, and I'm responsible for all of these steps. And what I'm going to be doing, what happens when this request was submitted, because of that automation rule, it did two things. It put it into this first step, and it sent an email notification to me that I had a step to approve. So in your example, it's going to put any future requests into the initial review step, and Jonathan is going to get an email notification. And then this is what, and we'll take a look at what it looks like. We'll run an example through your environment in just a second. But at that point in time, Jonathan's going to be able to come to the actions, and this request will start to look pretty familiar, right? All of these items over here under the business case that have red circles are the items that are marked to true in that for request column or for reviews column, right? And now you folks that are going to be doing the review process can update all of this data as needed. You don't have to. So if you recall, in phase one, the requester needed to click on this and then mark it complete before they could go on to the next section. You can do that, but you're not going to be forced to. If I didn't do that to any of these, it wouldn't stop me from approving my step. It's just saying, here's more data that you can continue to capture about this request as you're going through your workflow steps, right? So again, these steps are high-level conceptual processes that you do internally. And the initial review might be reviewing these items in here. The requirements gathering might be looking at the role forecasts, those items in here. The resource estimation may be looking back at other parts of the tool. For example, in analysis, looking at resource reports and availability, looking at availability, running a report and going, okay, in the tool, in August, I need a server admin and a project manager, and this is showing availability. So if I needed a server admin for 20 hours in August and 30 hours in September, then yeah, I have somebody in here who's got availability. Schedule report, same thing. I could look to see, well, what are people scheduled on? This will show the active projects that people are scheduled on and any hours that they have scheduled, estimated schedule on that. So that potentially could be what you're doing in those steps. If I come back in here, those could be those items in here.
What triggers getting it into
Oh,
this initial review?
that is your service in your service catalog, right? And again, I would have to backdoor into your client portal. So I'm going to go into my Sandbox client portal. So a couple sessions ago, we built out your initial project request service, which is in your client portal, and it's going to look very similar to mine. So, and we'll run a request through its paces in just a second. But in the service catalog, there's a project request category and service. This this starts your project request process, requesting a service. This is that request form that you guys are designing. What's the project name? Who's the sponsor? Priority. You guys had the start and end date on there. So this creates the project request. Once it's saved, then that business case is opened up. We'll see that in just a second. Then once they submit it, then it comes into TD Next and appears here with the name in portfolio planning in project requests. So let me do this. Let me stop sharing, and let's have one of you open up your client portal.
That's it.
There you go. You can hit enter there, and that will take you. And then now click on the client portal. So go to the services, and now that I'm thinking about it, I don't think we've activated we might not have activated your service. Oh yeah, maybe we did. Project management, that's the category, so let's click on that. Project requests, yep, let's click on that.
Okay, so I am requesting a project. Is that right?
You are correct. So eventually at some point, you're going to be communicating this out to people that request projects, right? In some organizations, there are like super users who are the project requesters, or in some organizations, they limit it to just a couple of people. But eventually, you're going to communicate this out saying, we have a new project request service. This is where it's at. This is how you get there. And then this is the information you're going to be asked to fill out.
Okay.
And so submit a project request. Yep, that there. And then this is that request form that you guys are going to design or have been designing. So let's put Jeff's test project as the name here. And then it auto-populated to your account department on your user record, Jeff, which is good.
Okay.
Sponsor name it auto-populates you, but you could change it to somebody else if they were the sponsor. And then as you guys designed so far, you got a current start date. So let's put, that's your preferred start date. So hopefully people are smart enough that when they submit a project, they know it's going to, probably not start for a couple of weeks. So let's put current start date, August 1st. Let's just say August 1st. So go down to the July drop down, just switch that to August, or you could do that too. Yep, you could do that too.
Is that okay? Or?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And then an end date, let's put it out a couple of months. So go to like maybe October and just grab a random day in October or November.
Date reason.
And then projected end date reasoning, right? And that's because, you want somebody to give you a concrete reason why they want it done October 1st. Maybe they're starting an online class and they need it by then, or, yeah.
Okay.
And then you have your project description, project requirements. And here's where you guys can add more custom fields here to capture more data should you need to, right? This is part of your request form, that general area, and the custom attributes. So for now, for ease here, let's just go ahead and scroll back up and save this. So again, this is that request form, which equates to the general and custom attributes. And once they save it, then now they can hit OK. Oh, let's see, projected end date reasoning. We might have to change the attribute type. Nope. It says before fall term. We must have on the actual.
Oh,
Just put numbers in there because we need to switch that to text. Just put like the number 1. Yeah, that's fine. So I'll make a note that we want to go back and switch that. Or I might go back and switch that now. So this is that business case, right? Remember, we kept it really minimal. So the
okay.
general is this request form that we're looking at here. And this simply gives the requester another chance to edit their information and go, oh, I forgot a requirement, I forgot a description, I forgot a detail that I wanted to add here. Maybe it's like the projected end date should be. I have a better reason for that. But this just gives them a chance to edit what they put in. But they do need to hit the mark complete. The requester needs to hit the mark complete, right? And then we'll see that there's a check mark next to general in the left navigation now. And
Oh,
then the requester needs to click on the files, and then they don't have to add a file here, but they can with the add attachments, but they do need to hit the blue mark complete. And this concludes your phase 1 of the project request intake process, right? So this is all you're at so far to date. This is all
okay.
you're asking your requester to fill out: the request form and add an attachment, keeping it as simple as possible. And then hit the green review and submit button. Oh, and I'm sorry, it turned to black. When you had your cursor over it, it was green. There you go.
Oh,
Right
I see.
there, review and submit. Yep. And then hit the blue submit button, and then hit the OK. So phase 1 is now done. What has happened to this request? It's done 2 things. For the requester, so Jeff, if you were simply a requester that only had that client license and you did not have access to TDX, you can follow this project request along here in the client portal. Now there's a gray bar under the blue bar, and we see project requests in the left up there. Let's go ahead and click
Oh,
on that. So this is going to list all of Jeff's project requests in here.
okay.
We can see a little bit of detail in here. The status is, what's the status? It's in initial review, right? Because it
Right.
leveraged that automation rule that we just created to go into the first step of the workflow. And I apologize, Jonathan's not on the call, but he probably just got pinged with an email. Click
Okay.
on the request name. So click on the Jeff C test project, and you'll be able to see exactly where we are. So it says it's in a workflow, and we have our 2-step workflow: the initial review that Jonathan's responsible for, and then the overall approval. So it's a real quick
Okay.
request form. It's a real quick workflow. And this is what the requester would see only in the client portal, because they only have access to the client portal. But now let's see where it also went for those of you who have access to TD Next. So in the upper right, click on your name, Jeff, and then go down to TD Next. Click on that. Yep. And then X out of this tiny little window here. All right. In the left navigation, your blue application menu, we want to go to portfolio planning. Remember, all project requests go through portfolio planning. And in the left navigation, it says project requests. Click on that. And here's our 2. We have 2 tests ones in here. And here's Jeff's. So again, we can see that it is in a workflow. The column over there that says it's in a workflow, the standard project request workflow. We know the status, it's in initial review.
I'm sorry. So you
We
said
know
it,
that,
said it showed, oh, right here. It's in the standard project.
yep,
Yeah. Okay.
yep.
Okay.
And then if you click on it, it'll look similar to you as well.
Yes.
Click on the name. And so this, for those of you that are going to be workflow step reviewers and approvers, this is where you're going to be doing your work. You're going to come into it here. If you scroll down, you'll be able to see that 2-step workflow, just like we saw it in the client portal. There it is. If you leveraged the scoring component, you'd be able to see the score down there. If there were any files attached, you'd be able to see the files down there. And the feed. The feed is a running audit trail of your project request and project, and you'll be able to see all the things that have been touched on that. So if Jonathan is responsible for this step, and let's just swap that out and say Jeff is responsible for this step, the first thing you're going to do is go to the green actions button. Well, maybe not the first thing, but eventually you're going to come here. If you had multiple workflows, which again I say is pretty atypical, usually it's just one, so we don't have to switch it. But if you happen to have more workflows down the road, you can manually switch it to the appropriate workflow if it was in the wrong one. That's the assigned to workflow.
Okay.
But you have access to all of these capabilities because you have an enterprise license. Even though you, Jeff, you weren't put on responsible for any of those steps, because of your enterprise license and the permissions associated to it, you're getting capabilities on top of this. And so you can do all of those actions, right? You can approve the step, you can reject it, you can move it back to the requester to gather more information. But typically what you're going to be doing here is going into looking at the general information that's been gathered here, right? And then maybe if there's an attachment, you're going to look at the file attachment. If part of your process is to sit down with the requester and capture more data or get their, quote, story, then you may go into these items that have the red circles in here and update these sections, right? Maybe you go back into the files and add an attachment. Maybe you go back into the general area and you edit the requirements, you edit the description, maybe you add items in here.
So if you want to just add a comment here,
you'd go down to the feed.
Oh, and
then you'd add a comment there. Yep.
Oh, okay.
Like I met with the requester, and here's the information that I gathered from them. And you can send out notifications of your comment if you wanted to. So again, many of these items that are true here, the reason that they're set to true is just in case you want to use them. That's why we're seeing a lot of these red circles. You can certainly turn those to false and minimize those if you want to keep your process more simplified.
And then can I edit the requirements and the description?
Absolutely. You absolutely can. Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. That gives me a little bit better perspective. Yeah.
So let's go back up to the business case in the left with the little briefcase there. Click on that again. So let's walk this through. Just so you can see the process, because we're in phase 2, right? We're in project request review phase now. Let's go to the actions button. And then, and then let's go down and approve the step. And you can put a comment on why you're approving the step right here.
So I can take out Jonathan and put in James?
Yeah, you could.
So then James should have got an email, right?
Now, it might take a minute or so for the squirrels to kind of get running. Scroll down though, and we can see it is now in step 2, and we can see that James is, that James has been selected as the.
That's where do you see step 2? Or?
Scroll up, right there. It's on the green bar, okay. So it's in the. And then in the responsibility column, you swapped out Jonathan.
Okay, yeah.
I've rarely had anybody do that, but that's actually not a bad option. You can select anybody who's got an enterprise license to swap out if that next step isn't quite known.
Oh, okay. Then if we want to add a list of people who are part of this project, so let's say that we have a consultant and we have some directors in different departments, and we haven't.
So those are in this phase. We can only do 2 things. We can add role forecasts, which are leveraging your functional roles. So go to the role forecast in the left navigation and go up to add resource. So you can't add a real person here. So I couldn't add like James or Jonathan. But what I could do is select from functional roles, and you might create a functional role called like a vendor, but I'll
Or
show you how
consultant?
to add. Yeah, but for a functional role, click on the lookup menu, and this will show your existing list of functional roles.
Okay. So let's just say,
Click on one that has a member on it. So we can see there's no members on server
oh, I see.
programmer, so we're not going to be able to. Just click on participant for lack of a better term here, because I want to put you down as this probably resource. So go ahead and pretend that participant is a real role. Just click on
Okay.
that one. All right. So what you can do on functional roles, and this goes back to that resource planning, scheduling, estimation. You can select a functional role and say, I need this role. You see the resource dates? That's the start and end date that you put in, Jeff, of August 1st
Oh,
to October 2nd. I can select when I need this role for any time between those two dates, right?
hmm.
And which is pretty legitimate for a project. I might not need somebody for the entire project. I might need them for the first couple of months. I might need them for the last month. I could select it by months or weeks.
Hmm.
So click on the interval button that says weeks, and then under hours, let's put in a total of 20 hours, and then go up to generate,
Wow.
and it's already starting to generate a schedule for you for this role called participant for the start and end date of the actual full project. And it's just level setting that 20 hours over those weeks. So it already starts to do some resource management for you based on the functional role. And that's where the functional role can be leveraged quite heavily and can be powerful. And then what would happen is we're still looking only at this as a request. It's not an approved project yet. Once we do approve this, we are then going to be forced to change this participant role into a real person. So at that point, we can change it to somebody who has the participant down as a functional role on their user record. So all of you have this as the default role. So we'll see how we can do this. So let's go ahead and go up and, go ahead and look at it from a month perspective if you want.
Let's see. So if I generate this, it's just going to show the
Yep, it's just going to level
month.
set the 20 hours over the start and end date.
Okay.
And then go ahead and hit the green save button. And then if you X out of here and we go back to that request, the other thing you can do is add stakeholders. Now, stakeholders are people that are not project task doers. They're simply stakeholders that want to be informed on about the project potentially in the updates on a project. So normally this might be like the director, somebody who's again not going to be put on a task but can be included in communications. So you can list the names here, and then you do have to put in, it's that would be creating a brand new person. So hopefully you don't have to create a brand new person.
Okay.
What you want to do is select from the lookup menu from your existing user base and add people in here, and then determine what's their responsibility about this particular one. And then are they, then you have a RACI, right? Are they responsible for this project? Are they just accountable for it? Should they be consulted as needed or just informed? So it's kind of just a little, need to know. So probably informed.
So I put that first.
All right.
So now if we go back up here, does it? Okay. Participants, stakeholders. Okay. Okay, good.
So let's go back to the green actions button. And let's go down to the approve request. So we've done our 2 steps. Now we decided, we've looked at all the data we needed to, and we are indeed going to approve this request to become an active project. So let's just put a comment here saying project approved to start.
So this
August
is still
1st.
Okay. So does this move it? Okay. Does this move this into phase 3, or does it keep it into phase 2?
It does.
Okay.
It's still in phase 2 until we do 2 or 3 more things here in just a split second. So we're walking it from phase 2 to phase 3. So this is at the bottom of phase 2, and we're about to walk it to the top of phase 3, so to speak. So this is called project approval. This is called technically request approval and project activation. So go ahead and hit the save button. And right now it could sit here as an approved project request, right? So if we X out of here for a split second, we're going to see this still inside portfolio planning, right? We're in TD Next, we're in portfolio planning. If you go to refresh this page, the blue refresh underneath your application menu, or that one, now it's an approved request, right? So it's the bottom of
Okay.
phase 3. Let's click back on the name of it again and go to the green actions button. And we do not want to assign it to a workflow because that will start everything all over again. We want to staff it. So now we're walking it from phase 2 to phase 3. So staffing it is going to force us to, this is making the project active. We can update the status. We haven't talked about health portfolios and the project templates yet. That's up. Let's go ahead and hit the green next button.
Okay.
And this makes us turn this participant role that you just identified into a real person. So put yourself in here, Jeff.
I don't see myself.
Where are you? Let's see. Scroll up for a second. Let's see. Click on, click on that one for a second. And then click on both. Yep. Just to double check.
Do I need to refresh?
And then hit the search, hit the green search button. Did we may have canceled the participant role out on your user record.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so maybe it's not being flagged as
that could be the problem here. Darn, I didn't want that to happen because I don't want you to lose this. Well, let's click on James's name here at least. So what it's doing is it is forcing us to change the functional role to a real person, and then you must at least put a project manager as one person has to be the manager of the project. So that would be James for now. And then hit the green next button. And now we've successfully created this project. So let's just prove that we did that. So close this window and then hit the green refresh here. And that request is gone. It will never be a request again.
Oh, okay.
It is sitting in portfolio. It is sitting no longer in portfolio planning. It is go back to your application menu, which is underneath the Imperial, the upper left. If you go to projects workspaces, you're not going to see it because you are not on the project. If James is in TD Next right now and he comes to projects workspaces, he would see this in the left navigation. Yep. Where you can see it though is in the analysis application. Go to analysis, and in the left navigation, click on the active project search. And this is where enterprise license people can see all projects in here.
Okay, very good.
So we've successfully walked it all the way through all 3 phases. We created it as a request. We looked at it. We reviewed it on those 2 steps that you have in your workflow. And then we added a resource, approved it, and then staffed it.
Yeah, that was very helpful.
Yeah, so it kind of builds on all the little things that we've been doing together over the last couple of sessions. It ties it all together. And then what we do now on our upcoming sessions are to look at things in that phase 3. How do you add additional resources to that project? How do you add additional stakeholders? How do you update and work with the issues and risks? And then how do you create templates, project plans? All of the project management stuff is going to be happening on our next couple of sessions. Okay, yeah, I'll send you my notes today that include the workflow templates, the steps, and then the approval process. I'll send you the actual hard copy of that training guide, and then I believe it's on like page 26 that will walk you through that activate, staffing, adding resources and all of that as part of that guide you'll have at your fingertips. Thanks all. You guys have a great rest of your Tuesday, and we'll talk to you on Thursday.